then the only thing left is that we wanted to touch a bit more on meditation, because I mean, most people will close the video now if they haven't yet. But I personally am also a big fan of meditation, and I actually meditate between 45 minutes and 1 hour every single day without ever. I haven't skipped a day in over 2 years.
That's
when
awesome,
I
man.
started this. When I started this, well, okay, but I'm also a person who doesn't have a very exciting life, so I don't do a lot of interesting stuff. But I like it like this. I
That's a
like it
good
this
thing.
way. Yeah, it also has a few downsides, but this is just how I feel the best. Yeah, why do you meditate? What are the benefits you get out of this? And maybe how much do you meditate? How often and for how long?
Sure. There was a number of very formative experiences I had. One of them being that story I told earlier, where when I was solving that shuffle algorithm, my mind was still for a moment. Excuse me, sorry. My mind was still for a moment, and that was a very unique experience. My natural sort of mental state is my mind constantly analyzing everything and constantly asking questions. And I have what I would say a very overactive imagination, and it's very like 3D. So I spent a lot of my time in classes not paying attention to lectures, but basically just imagining worlds in my head kind of thing. And that had some very negative side effects. I think that's probably why I can visualize an entire software architecture and the flow of information in my head. But the bad thing is that that stuff was still happening when I would be like talking to someone. And unfortunately, if 90 to 80% of your CPU is analyzing things or imagining things or worrying about what the other person says or how they're judging you or all these sorts of things, you're going to have very messed up communication with other human beings. As opposed to what I'm doing right now, which is I'm not thinking about whether I'm doing a good job on this podcast. I'm not thinking about whether I'm saying something stupid. I'm just in this present moment, letting the words flow out, and whatever happens, happens. So, anyways, that was that first formative experience. The second formative experience, and this will sound weird to people, I started doing powerlifting in high school. And what made me love powerlifting is that just before I lifted a really heavy weight, moments before, my mind went absolutely quiet. Dave Tate, who's this famous powerlifter, calls it the void. So I would have a moment of pure stillness. My entire existence boils down to lift this weight. And my vision would basically, it's not that my vision would go dark, but I would stop paying attention to what I was seeing. And I would just focus in on lifting this heavy thing off the ground. So I had these two experiences of like, I want that. My mind shut up for a second because my mind was very out of control for most of all of my teenage years. The third experience I had wasn't what I would call a moment of stillness. I'm going to avoid using the Buddhist jargon. I'll try and use some basic English words. Those moments of stillness, the third experience I had, I was working as a suit salesman, a fine clothing salesperson. Now, you've got to understand, I'm an introvert. I wore very plain clothing. So it's a funny story how I ended up in this job, but you've got to understand that it was a very unnatural environment because I'm an extreme introvert who doesn't know how to dress, trying to tell old rich people how to dress. The first 18 months or so of that job was horrendous. But after about 2 years, I finally got decent, and I had this experience with a customer where I was cracking jokes, and this is like a 65-year-old rich person, and I'm like at the time I was 18. I'm cracking jokes. I'm almost what you could call suave. Oh, that was a good voice crack. My mom says I can date girls soon. I was suave, not like I was moments ago. I was loose. I was laughing. I had a great sale. I sold him a couple $100 worth of pants or something like that. And I felt great interacting with a stranger. After the sale, which took about 40 minutes, I walked into the back and some part of my mind said, "Who was that?" You're not like that. And then, so I kind of, it stopped me for a second because I'm like, wait a minute, this is completely outside my character and personality. I'm never like that. And then a second sort of thought popped into my head. If that's not you, who else could it be? So the short version of the story is that I realized in that moment that the ego is basically a made-up abstraction of memories and conditioning and all these sorts of things. And if you think if you think you are your ego, essentially, your BS ideas about yourself and the other BS ideas that other people force on you, it's BS. And that was a very important experience because it untethered me from believing my own thoughts too closely, because I knew that they were inaccurate, potentially. Unfortunately, I didn't know how to put that experience into context, and I wasn't meditating, so I was still miserable for like 2 years after that. When I was around 21 years old or 20, I'm 27 now, just about to turn 28, I was looking for some way to get back to that stillness. And the thing that jumped out at me is, probably some of you people are aware of an image of a Vietnamese, I believe, Buddhist Theravada monk who self-immolated, which is a big fancy word for he had gasoline poured all over himself, lit a match, burned himself alive.
Yeah, there's a Wikipedia article about this if people are interested. It's called The Burning Monk, I think.
Yeah, and I looked at that and yeah, on a certain level, it's a pretty horrific image, but I thought to myself, I can't sit down and do nothing for like 5 minutes. And this fellow sat there, burned himself alive, and didn't move. I need to know what's going on there. That's how it started. Unfortunately, so I'm a very scientifically critical-minded person, and the community I went to school in, Salt Spring it's called, is full of hippies, and so I really have an aversion to pseudo-spiritual, love the world, namaste dude, West Coast crap, and I still have some aversion to that. So the first couple of resources I learned at really didn't appeal to me. And I understand that was my conditioning working, and that actually, there was still some useful information in that stuff, but I wasn't ready to hear it. My favorite person at the time, my favorite thinker, was Sam Harris. And he was known as being like one of the most famous atheists on the planet. Now, if you're religious, I'm cool with you, okay? No anti-religion stuff here, but that's what he's known for. But he also meditated. And I thought to myself, why is the most critical and skeptical thinker I've ever come across meditating? To condense a lot of experience, I started with Sam Harris's early guided meditations many, many years ago, and they helped a little bit, but I needed a lot more help than that. Eventually, I came across some teachers in a school of Buddhism, which is called Theravada Buddhism. And I don't think it really matters which one. They all typically point to the same things. I came across a teacher who, for the first time ever, explained the meditation process in a way that made sense to me and gave me a way to do it. Because a lot of early resources I'd found said, sit in an uncomfortable position. Even if in your culture, you never sit cross-legged ever, sit cross-legged so you're uncomfortable as heck, to avoid the expletive. And then focus on your breathing or whatever. Try not to think, which doesn't work. So again, to make a very long story quite a bit shorter here, for my first 4 years of meditation practice, I was doing like 10 to 20 minutes a day. Sometimes I would take months where I wouldn't do it at all. I would have some experiences of stillness. So stillness is or a flow state, your channel name, Coding in Flow.
Yeah, this is where this name is coming from, actually.
I figured I would have a flow state is basically what they call samadhi in Buddhism, or stillness. I call it functional stillness. That's my own name for it, because it's weird in a certain way, nothing's happening, but everything is happening. Anyways, I'll shut up now. Things are just flowing through. So it would give me those some moments of stillness, but overall I was just in a really stressful situation and my mind was still racing. Many years later, like 5 years later, something started to shift where parts of my conditioning and trauma started to sort of come up and then they would dissipate. It's very difficult to describe. And pretty much since then, on a good day, I meditate 30 minutes to an hour. I don't really have actually a daily sitting practice so much anymore, but I meditate a lot throughout the day in moments. Like, for example, it's something I've been trying to do while I've been talking to you periodically. So that's kind of been my experience lately. There's a lot more I could say, but I'm really curious to hear what your experiences are as well.
Yeah, so first of all, if people want to learn about meditation, the book I base my practice on is called The Mind Illuminated. I will put this into the description below. The author of this, who recently passed away only a few days ago, I think he had a history as a brain scientist. So the book has science in it. And also, as you said, Sam Harris is a really scientific guy. He's also into brain science stuff, right? I don't know what actually he does, but he
has a neuroscience PhD.
Okay. So this is also why I find these sources very interesting, because I'm also not a fan of this woo-woo stuff. I don't trust this, but I trust science. And meditation is playing a bigger and bigger role in science. And if people want to hear Sam Harris talk about meditation, there's a really nice video there's a clip of this somewhere on YouTube. Just type in Sam Harris, Joe Rogan meditation. There's a clip where he explains the purpose of meditation, and he explains it really nicely. And he goes a bit into the difference between pain and suffering and what meditation can give you. So this is a great video, which I sometimes just watch again from time to time. And yeah, I started meditation like 2 or 3 years ago. I don't know how long exactly. And initially I started it because I hoped that it could help me with procrastination. And I guess it did a little bit, but it actually didn't have a real big effect on procrastination. I fixed procrastination with other means, like, as you mentioned earlier, with a schedule. But I still stick to a meditation, even though it doesn't give me what I initially tried to get out of it. But it just so much makes sense to me. I also have naturally a very active mind, and I've always been someone who worries a lot. And I also remember times when I was younger, when I spent times with friends, that people would get really, or some people who didn't really know me would kind of get mad at me because I felt, some people thought I was really disinterested or really bored with a situation. But what was really happening was that my mind was always thinking about something else, just not the present moment. So I was always a bit in this bad state, and other people noticed that. And yeah, what meditation basically gives me, as you already said, it doesn't make your thoughts stop, because they just pour out of your unconsciousness into your conscious mind. This just happens automatically. But they make you notice when you are lost in thought. It's like Sam Harris says, it's a bit like seeing your thoughts on a screen in front of you instead of directly in your head. It gives you this third-person view on your thoughts, and this can be really useful, because if you don't have this third-person viewer, then what happens is the whole day are just thoughts coming up, and you are getting lost in these thoughts. And this colors your whole experience the whole day. This is basically what happens. Thoughts are coming up, and you are living through these thoughts. And getting this third-party viewer basically lets you detach from this a little bit. It lets you notice, hey, this is just happening. It doesn't mean that this is me. It doesn't mean that I have to go through all these thoughts, or that I have to get lost in them, or that they have to control my. It's really not so easy to explain. So I recommend that people try it out. But it basically helps you being happier just by being a bit more in the present moment. And it also makes you less emotionally reactive, because again, you have this third person viewer on your own reaction, which gives you a moment that you can reconsider it. So someone says something to you, and an angry thought pops into your head out of unconsciousness, and you get angry because your body physically, your heart starts racing or stuff like that. So you feel angry, and what normally happens is we immediately start being this angry person, immediately start living out this angriness, reacting angry, saying stuff that we regret later. And by having this third person viewer on this reaction, you notice, oh, this person said this, an angrier thought is coming up, and I feel this in my body. And just being detached from this helps you to react much better, helps you to react much more objectively in the situation. I hope this makes sense to people. Again, they should just try it out, but you need patience for meditation. This is a bit of downside of this. And I think this is a reason why so very few people actually do this. You need to do it for a while until it really starts showing its effects.
Oh yeah, it took me 4 years before I was actually meditating. Like for the first 4 years, I was pretty much just sitting there trying not to think and being very uncomfortable. And even in that, you can get some benefit, but it eventually you will be able to properly meditate, and it's pretty indescribable how good it feels to need absolutely nothing to feel perfectly content in the present moment. And that was a very alien experience for me growing up with the people I grew up around. Substances and distraction was their way to feel good. And that's a horrible way to live.
Yeah, this is basically the real big goal when you do a real proper meditation practice, that you try to get to a state where you can be unconditionally happy, no matter how the world around you is. You're not searching for anything anymore. Now, this doesn't mean you have to just sit there and do nothing. You can actually still function in the world, but the present moment is perfect the way it is. And it's not dependent on your goals, for example, or when your next meal is, or if you have the right partner. It's unconditional, just in the present moment. And I think this is actually possible. I'm not in the state yet but I got some tastes of that, where I was just like, okay, if I just for a moment don't try to, I don't know, think about these goals, or try to be present and accept the present moment as it is, then I got a little bit of a taste of this. Then I was sometimes just happy, because I realized that it's me striving for these external things that actually makes me impatient. It's not so much how the present moment is, because the present moment is mostly fine in most situations. But that you always want something, this is what really makes you unsatisfied. That happiness is always somewhere around the corner. We are never really satisfied. And this is ingrained in our DNA as humans, or as living beings, because this is how we survive, and this is how we build civilizations, by wanting more, by always wanting to get the next thing and the next thing. And this is how we are naturally wired. But if you don't do anything to get around this, or to mediate this, then you will always be unsatisfied, because dissatisfaction is what gets us forward in life. But it's important to control this a little bit, so that you can actually be happy at certain times.
If I may, I just want to add one little thing here, which hopefully might assuage some of the concerns for people. You might hear what Florian and I just said and worry, am I going to become unfeeling? Is that what you're saying? Or am I
hear
going
that
to
often.
Yeah, or am I going to lose my imagination? Because being able to imagine entire worlds in your head sounds pretty useful. Don't worry, those things are still going to be there. When it comes to like your faculties, you're actually going to be able to use them better. And the analogy I like to use for this is you should imagine your brain like a CPU. So in an uncontrolled mind, your mind's at like 80 to 100% CPU constantly, and things need to compete for, processing power. After meditation, it's way down to like 10, 20%. If you're really deep, like 1%, 0%. When you need to use your imagination, you can use it. Don't worry, you didn't control it to begin with. It'll do its thing. And it'll have more free bandwidth to do what it needs to do. And then secondly, you won't become unfeeling. Quite the opposite. You will feel the present moment a lot more distinctly. What changes is you won't be so focused on reacting to the feelings, essentially like the ego impressions and the thoughts about the feelings. And those ego impressions and thoughts, when out of control, is the suffering, the psychological suffering of things. It's important to differentiate physical suffering with psychological suffering, but if you can just deal with the psychological suffering, then you're going to be a much happier person for it, in my opinion, my experience.
Yeah, I often use that the difference between physical suffering and psychological suffering. I think the physical suffering is often just called pain to differentiate between these two. So, for example, the book I mentioned, The Mind Illuminated, in the book, the author says, pain is inevitable when you are a living being, but suffering is completely optional. This is how he says it. So, pain, either emotional or physical, is only the sensation, but suffering is your aversion to the sensation. So you can actually feel pain without suffering. But again, I'm not enlightened yet, so I still suffer. So when someone throws a hammer on my leg, then I still suffer. But apparently there is a difference between pain and suffering. And also the video from Sam Harris I mentioned earlier, he actually explains that theoretically someone could torture you physically and you could be able to not suffer from this. So you would have pain, but you would not suffer. Now, I don't know if there are any people on this world that actually reach this state, but some claim that they reach this state. And you mentioned the burning monk, right, who burned himself without screaming, I think. So it seems to be possible. But this is now we're at a point where people are probably thinking we are out of our minds. But for daily life,
dude.
But for daily life, it's just nice to not be lost in thought all the time, and it will make you happier. And as Ryan already said, you don't have less good ideas just because you are not thinking in your head all the time, because ideas are actually coming out of the subconscious mind, not consciousness. So ruminating the same stuff over and over again, maybe this kicks off but I think it doesn't actually have much of a purpose anyway. I think this conscious ruminating is not very useful in general, because your subconscious mind is actually doing the heavy lifting. It's coming up with the real solutions. This is also why you have the best solutions usually after waking up or after being at the gym for a while or going for a walk, because again, your subconscious mind is doing all the heavy lifting, all the important thinking.
Yeah.
And yeah, again, you don't become unfeeling. You just don't unnecessarily cling to certain feelings. So you are able to let them go. But this doesn't mean that you can never cry again when your family member dies or something like that. You're still a normal, you don't turn into a robot. You're still a normal person. And I sometimes compare not meditating or not having some kind of meditation practice. I think yoga also works, because yoga has some meditation elements in it. But I like to compare it a bit with not meditating is like not doing any physical exercise at all. You just basically hope that it works out. You don't train your mind. You just hope that you get through life the way it works by default. This is a bit like never exercising and just hoping that your body doesn't break. And I find it a very interesting topic, and there are many people I listen to that teach the stuff that don't try to sell anything at all. They don't even have a product they try to sell. There are certain people like that, like what was his name? His second name was Gary Rapper, I think. He is someone who makes videos about the stuff and presentations, but he doesn't have anything he wants to sell. Now, I think he has a book, but books are usually, they have a price because they need to be printed and everything. But it seems like there are a lot of people that I can trust in this topic because I know they're not trying to sell me something.